"Do not look at her like she is nothing," the Lycan King said as the entire kingdom watched the forgotten Omega stand alone beneath the lights of the royal ceremony. Before that moment, Charlotte Bennet had always been the person people overlooked. She was the quiet Omega from a noble family that no longer remembered her kindness, only her lack of status. But on the night of the Silver Moon ceremony, the entire kingdom would discover that the person they ignored was the one who carried the greatest strength. The grand hall of Silver Moon Castle shone with golden lights as nobles from every territory gathered for the annual Luna selection ceremony. It was a night where families presented their finest daughters, hoping to gain recognition from the most powerful ruler in the Lycan realm. Charlotte arrived wearing a simple dress she had carefully prepared herself. She did not expect attention. She did not seek power. She only wanted to stand with dignity and honor her family's name. But the moment she entered the hall, she felt the familiar whispers around her, the same voices that had followed her for years. Her stepsisters, Victoria and Eleanor Bennet, stood among the guests wearing elegant gowns and confident smiles. Unlike Charlotte, they had spent years trying to prove their worth through appearance and reputation. They believed Charlotte's quiet nature made her weak. They believed an Omega like her could never belong among the most respected families. As the ceremony began, Charlotte stood at the edge of the crowd, watching others receive praise and admiration. She was used to being unseen. She had learned that expecting kindness from others often led to disappointment. Still, she refused to let bitterness change her heart. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. "Your worth is not decided by how others see you. It is decided by who you choose to become." Those words had carried Charlotte through every difficult moment. But that night, her stepsisters decided they wanted the entire kingdom to see her as they did. In the middle of the ceremony, they approached her with false smiles and cruel intentions hidden behind polite words. They wanted to remind everyone that Charlotte was not like them. They wanted her to feel small in front of the powerful guests watching nearby. The crowd grew quiet as Charlotte stood there, trying to remain calm. She felt the weight of every judgmental glance, every whispered opinion, and every assumption people had made about her. But she lifted her head. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose herself. Then something unexpected happened. From the highest seat in the hall, the Lycan King noticed her. Adrian Blackwood had watched countless ceremonies before. He had seen people compete for attention, praise, and influence. But Charlotte was different. While everyone else focused on appearances, she carried something he could not ignore. She carried grace even when she had every reason to feel defeated. The Lycan King rose from his throne, and the entire hall fell silent. No one understood why the ruler of the Lycan realm was moving toward the Omega everyone had dismissed. Charlotte looked up in surprise as Adrian approached. She did not know that this single moment would change her entire destiny. She did not know that the person standing before her was about to show the kingdom what true strength really looked like. The entire hall watched in silence as the Lycan King stepped away from his throne. No one expected Adrian Blackwood to move toward the Omega standing alone among the nobles. For years, Charlotte Bennet had been treated as someone who should remain in the background, someone whose voice mattered less because of her position. Yet in that single moment, the most powerful ruler in the Lycan realm saw something that everyone else had ignored. He saw her strength. Charlotte did not know what to do as Adrian approached. She had spent years learning not to draw attention, especially in places where people judged her before knowing her. She expected criticism, not recognition. She expected whispers, not respect. But the expression on the Lycan King's face was different from the one she had seen all evening. There was no judgment. There was only understanding. The nobles watched carefully as Adrian removed his royal cloak. The symbol of the Lycan King carried great meaning throughout the kingdom. It represented honor, protection, and the responsibility of the one who wore it. When Adrian gently placed the cloak around Charlotte's shoulders, the entire hall seemed to forget how to breathe. No one could understand why the king would offer such a gesture to an Omega who had been overlooked by everyone else. Charlotte looked at the cloak around her and then back at Adrian. "Your Majesty, I do not deserve this," she said quietly. Adrian looked at her with calm confidence. "You are mistaken. This was never about what you deserve. It is about what you have shown." Charlotte did not understand his words yet. She did not know that Adrian had been watching more than the ceremony. He had noticed how she remained respectful even when others tried to embarrass her. He had seen how she refused to respond with anger. He had seen a person who protected her own kindness, even when the world gave her reasons to abandon it. The hall remained divided. Some nobles looked surprised. Others exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected the Lycan King to choose someone from one of the strongest families. They believed power came from bloodlines and influence. But Adrian had always searched for something beyond appearances. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his approval, but few who truly understood responsibility and compassion. Charlotte represented everything he valued but rarely found. Meanwhile, Charlotte struggled to understand why someone like Adrian would notice someone like her. She had spent so long accepting that she was different from the others that being treated with respect felt almost unfamiliar. "Why me?" she asked softly. Adrian paused before answering. "Because when everyone was focused on being seen, you were the only one who remembered what truly mattered." His words stayed with her. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt that someone had looked beyond her title as an Omega. Someone had seen the person beneath it. The ceremony continued, but everything had changed. The kingdom had entered the night expecting to celebrate the next step in royal tradition. Instead, they witnessed a moment that challenged everything they believed. The Lycan King had not chosen the most admired person in the room. He had recognized the one person who remained kind when no one was watching. And Charlotte Bennett, the Omega everyone tried to dismiss, had become the person who captured the attention of the most powerful ruler in the realm. The moment the Lycan King placed his cloak around Charlotte Bennett's shoulders became the only thing anyone in Silver Moon Castle could talk about. The ceremony that was supposed to showcase status and tradition had become a moment that challenged everything the kingdom believed about worth and power. For Charlotte, however, the attention was overwhelming. She had spent so many years trying not to be noticed that standing in the center of the royal hall felt unfamiliar. The same people who once looked past her were now watching her carefully, wondering why the Lycan King had chosen to recognize her. Adrian Blackwood noticed her uncertainty. He understood that the cloak around her shoulders carried a meaning she had never asked for. It was not simply a royal symbol. It was a statement that her value did not depend on the opinions of others. After the ceremony ended, Charlotte quietly stepped away from the crowd. She wanted a moment to understand everything that had happened. She had entered the hall expecting another painful reminder of where she stood in society. Instead, she had become the focus of the entire kingdom. Adrian found her near the castle gardens, standing beneath the silver moonlight. "You seem uncomfortable with the attention," he said. Charlotte looked down at the royal cloak. "I am not used to people noticing me for the right reasons." Her honesty surprised him. Many people would have taken the opportunity to gain influence or admiration. Charlotte only wanted to understand why she had received kindness from someone she believed was far beyond her world. "You did not protect yourself by becoming cruel," Adrian said. "That is rare." Charlotte looked at him quietly. "I just did not want the way others treated me to decide who I became." Those words stayed with Adrian. The Lycan King had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. They admired his power, his title, and his position. But Charlotte was different. She did not approach him with expectations. She did not try to impress him. She simply spoke the truth. Meanwhile, the reactions throughout the castle continued. Charlotte's stepsisters, Victoria and Eleanor, struggled to understand why their plan had created the opposite result. They had wanted the kingdom to see Charlotte as insignificant. Instead, everyone had witnessed her calmness and the king's respect for her. The attention they sought for themselves had turned toward the person they tried to dismiss. As the days following the ceremony passed, Adrian began learning more about Charlotte's life. He discovered that her kindness was not something she displayed only when others were watching. She had spent years helping servants, villagers, and those who had fewer opportunities than herself. She never spoke about those actions because she did not believe they were special. To Charlotte, helping others was simply the right thing to do. This made Adrian question many things about the traditions of his kingdom. For generations, people had believed that the strongest families created the best leaders. But Charlotte showed him that leadership was not only about authority. It was about compassion, responsibility, and understanding. One evening, Adrian looked at the royal cloak resting beside Charlotte and realized something important. He had not given it to her because she needed protection. He had given it to her because the entire kingdom needed to recognize what he already saw. The Omega they overlooked possessed the very qualities their future needed. And while Charlotte still wondered why the Lycan King had chosen her, Adrian already knew the answer. She was the first person in years who saw the man beneath the crown. The days after the ceremony brought a change throughout Silver Moon Castle that no one could ignore. Charlotte Bennet was no longer the Omega people whispered about in quiet corners. She was now the woman who had received the Lycan King's own cloak, a symbol that carried more meaning than anyone expected. Yet despite the sudden attention, Charlotte remained unchanged. She still walked through the castle halls with the same gentle expression, still thanked every servant she met, and still treated everyone with the same respect she had shown before anyone knew her name. Adrian Blackwood noticed this more than anyone. The Lycan King had expected Charlotte to feel different after receiving recognition, but she did not. She did not become proud. She did not use her new position to make others feel small. Instead, she continued being the person who had captured his attention from the beginning. One morning, Adrian invited Charlotte to visit the eastern villages of the Lycan realm. He wanted her to see the kingdom beyond the walls of the palace, where ordinary families lived and worked. Charlotte was surprised by the invitation. She wondered why the Lycan King wanted her opinion on matters that involved the entire realm. Because you see things others ignore, Adrian explained. During their journey, Charlotte noticed details that many nobles would have missed. She saw families who needed support during difficult seasons. She listened to villagers who rarely had the chance to share their concerns with someone from the palace. Adrian watched quietly as she connected with people naturally. She did not speak like someone trying to impress the king. She spoke like someone who genuinely cared. This confirmed what he had already begun to understand. Charlotte's kindness was not a performance. It was who she truly was. When they returned to the castle, Adrian faced questions from members of the royal council. Some believed the Lycan King was allowing emotions to influence important decisions. They questioned why an Omega with no powerful family background was being given such attention. Adrian listened calmly. He had faced challenges from the council before, but this time he knew exactly what he wanted to say. A person's value is not created by their family name, he said. It is revealed through their actions when no one is watching. The word surprised many in the room. For generations, the kingdom had focused on bloodlines, influence, and reputation. Adrian was reminding them that leadership requires something deeper. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued to struggle with one question. She understood why Adrian respected her kindness, but she still wondered why someone like him would care so much about someone like her. She had spent years believing she was simply an overlooked Omega who needed to find her place in the world. She never imagined that the Lycan King would be the person to show her that she already had value. One evening, Charlotte returned the royal cloak to Adrian. She gently held it out and said, "This belongs to you. I cannot keep something that represents the entire kingdom." Adrian looked at her with surprise. "You misunderstand. I did not give it to you because you needed something to wear. I gave it to you because you deserved to be seen." Those words touched Charlotte deeply. For the first time, she began to believe that perhaps her life had always held more meaning than she realized. And Adrian understood that the Omega everyone had overlooked was becoming the person who could change the future of the entire Lycan realm. The connection between Charlotte Bennet and Adrian Blackwood continued to grow, but neither of them realized how much their lives had already begun to change. To the kingdom, Charlotte was still a mystery. Many wondered how an Omega who had once been ignored could now stand beside the Lycan King with such confidence. But those who spent time with her understood the truth. Charlotte had not changed because of the attention. The attention changed because people finally noticed who she had always been. As the weeks passed, Adrian invited Charlotte to participate in discussions about the villages and communities throughout the Lycan realm. At first, Charlotte hesitated. She believed her place was somewhere in the background, not among leaders and advisors. She worried that others would think she was trying to gain influence. Adrian noticed her hesitation and reminded her that her voice mattered. A kingdom does not become stronger by listening only to the powerful, he told her. It becomes stronger when it listens to those who understand the people. Charlotte slowly began sharing her thoughts. She spoke about the importance of helping families who felt forgotten. She suggested ways the palace could create stronger connections with smaller territories. Her ideas were not complicated, but they came from genuine understanding. Adrian saw the difference immediately. Many advisors spoke about numbers and resources, but Charlotte spoke about people. She reminded everyone that behind every decision was a person hoping to be heard. However, not everyone accepted the changes easily. Some members of the noble family still believed Charlotte's place beside the Lycan King was temporary. They remembered the girl they had overlooked and struggled to accept the woman she was becoming. Among them were Victoria and Eleanor Bennet. They had expected Charlotte to disappear after the ceremony. Instead, she had gained the respect they had always wanted. They watched as the kingdom began to admire her kindness rather than her status. Charlotte noticed their discomfort, but she refused to respond with anger. She understood that resentment often came from fear and insecurity. She chose to continue showing the same patience that had guided her from the beginning. Adrian admired this quality more than anything else. He had expected Charlotte to want revenge after everything she had experienced. Instead, she wanted understanding. She wanted people to become better, not simply to suffer for their mistakes. One evening, Adrian and Charlotte walked through the castle gardens beneath the soft glow of the moon. The quiet moment felt different from their first conversations. There was more trust between them now. "You know you do not have to prove yourself anymore," Adrian said. Charlotte looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe I am not trying to prove myself. Maybe I am just trying to remember that I was always enough." Adrian stopped for a moment. Those words revealed how deeply her past had affected her. The world had spent years telling Charlotte that she was less important, but she had never allowed those opinions to remove her compassion. That was the strength he admired. As they continued walking, Adrian realized something he had not expected. He had spent his life searching for someone worthy of standing beside the Lycan King. But Charlotte had shown him that the right person was not someone who chased power. It was someone who carried kindness even when the world refused to see it. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, the kingdom was beginning to understand the same truth. The quiet bond between Charlotte Bennet and Adrian Blackwood continued to grow, but neither of them wanted to rush what was forming between them. For Charlotte, everything still felt unfamiliar. She had spent most of her life believing she belonged on the edges of society, watching others receive the respect she never expected to have. Now she found herself standing beside the Lycan King, sharing her thoughts and being treated as someone whose voice mattered. Yet deep inside, a small part of her still wondered if this was only temporary. Adrian noticed those moments when Charlotte became quiet. He understood that years of being ignored could not disappear overnight. Respect from the entire kingdom was meaningful, but healing the doubts created by the past required time. He wanted Charlotte to know that his recognition was not based on a single ceremony or a moment of kindness. It was based on the person she had proven herself to be every day. One afternoon, Adrian invited Charlotte to visit the ancient library inside Silver Moon Castle. The library held records of the Lycan realm's history, including the stories of previous rulers and the people who stood beside them. Charlotte walked through the enormous halls filled with old books and carefully preserved memories. "Why are you showing me this place?" she asked. Adrian smiled slightly. "Because the future of the kingdom should understand its past." As they explored the library, Charlotte discovered that many great leaders throughout history were not remembered because of their power alone. They were remembered because they protected others, listened to different voices, and made choices that helped their people. She realized that Adrian was not simply trying to change the kingdom for her. He was trying to build the kind of kingdom he had always believed was possible. Meanwhile, rumors continued spreading throughout the noble circles. Some questioned whether an Omega should have such influence. Others believed the Lycan King was making decisions based only on personal feelings. Adrian knew these opinions would not disappear quickly. Changing old beliefs required patience. But he also knew that avoiding change would only continue the same unfair traditions that had overlooked people like Charlotte for generations. During a royal gathering, one advisor questioned Charlotte's role in the palace. The words were respectful, but the message was clear. They believed her background made her unprepared to stand beside the king. Before Charlotte could respond, Adrian calmly addressed the room. Experience is not only gained through titles and positions, he said. Some lessons can only be learned by understanding the lives of others. The room became silent. Charlotte looked at him with surprise. She had expected to defend herself, but Adrian had reminded everyone why her perspective mattered. Later that evening, Charlotte thanked him for speaking on her behalf. Adrian shook his head gently. I was not speaking for you. I was reminding them to listen. Those words stayed with her. For so long, Charlotte believed she needed someone else to prove her worth. But Adrian helped her understand that her value had always existed. The world simply needed time to recognize it. As the moon rose above Silver Moon Castle, the connection between the Omega and the Lycan King became stronger. They were no longer just two people brought together by a single moment. They were becoming partners who shared the same vision for a better future. And soon the entire kingdom would face a choice. Continue holding on to old beliefs, or accept the new era that Charlotte and Adrian were creating together. The changes within Silver Moon Castle became impossible to ignore. What began as a single moment during the ceremony had grown into a movement that challenged the oldest beliefs of the Lycan realm. Charlotte Bennet, once considered someone who should remain unseen, had become the person many people looked toward when discussing the future of the kingdom. Yet she still struggled to understand why. So many people believed she deserved such recognition. To her, she was only doing what she believed was right. Adrian Blackwood saw the difference between how Charlotte viewed herself and how the kingdom now viewed her. He knew that true confidence did not appear overnight. It was built through moments when someone finally realized their own worth. That was why he continued giving her opportunities to share her thoughts and participate in important decisions. He did not want the kingdom to follow her because of his approval. He wanted them to respect her because they understood her value. As preparations began for the annual Moonlight Gathering, the entire realm prepared to celebrate the unity of the Lycan people. Traditionally, the event was reserved for the most influential families and leaders. But this year, Adrian made a different choice. He asked Charlotte to stand beside him during the gathering. The announcement created immediate discussion throughout the kingdom. Some were inspired by the decision. Others questioned whether old traditions should change so quickly. Charlotte heard the conversations around her, and for the first time she felt the weight of being seen by everyone. She wondered if she was truly ready for such a responsibility. Adrian found her in the castle gardens before the event began. He noticed the uncertainty in her expression. You are thinking about stepping away, he said gently. Charlotte looked surprised. How did you know? Adrian smiled. Because you always worry about whether you are enough, even when everyone else can already see it. Charlotte looked toward the garden paths covered with silver flowers. I do not want people to think I am here because of you. I want them to believe in me because of who I am. Adrian respected her answer. It reminded him why he trusted her in the first place. Then do not stand beside me because you are the person the king chose, he said. Stand beside me because you are the person who earned your place. Those words gave Charlotte the confidence she needed. When the Moonlight Gathering began, she entered the grand hall beside Adrian. The crowd watched carefully, but this time Charlotte did not lower her gaze. She no longer saw herself as the forgotten Omega from a family that ignored her. She saw herself as someone who had survived difficult moments without losing her kindness. During the gathering, several villagers were invited to share their experiences with the royal family. Charlotte listened carefully to every story. She asked questions, offered ideas, and showed the same compassion that had defined her from the beginning. The people noticed. They realized the Lycan King's choice was not based on emotion alone. It was based on wisdom. By the end of the evening, even some of those who had doubted her began to understand. Charlotte was not changing the kingdom because she wanted power. She was changing it because she believed everyone deserved to be heard. Adrian watched her from across the hall, and felt certain that the future of the Lycan realm was beginning to change. The Omega everyone once overlooked had become the voice reminding the kingdom what true leadership meant. The Moonlight Gathering became a turning point for the entire Lycan realm. For the first time in generations, people began to look beyond family names and traditional expectations. They saw Charlotte Bennet not as an Omega who had been overlooked, but as a person whose compassion had the power to unite others. Yet despite the growing respect around her, Charlotte remained humble. She still remembered the lonely moments before the ceremony, when she believed her place was somewhere far away from the center of attention. Those memories kept her grounded and reminded her why she wanted to create a better future for others who felt unseen. Adrian Blackwood admired that about her. The Lycan King had spent years carrying the responsibility of protecting the kingdom, but he had often felt separated from the people he served. Charlotte changed that. She reminded him that leadership was not only about making decisions from a throne, it was about understanding the lives behind those decisions. Together, they began visiting different territories throughout the realm. Charlotte listened to families, workers, and communities that had rarely spoken directly with the royal court. She noticed details others ignored. A village that needed better support during winter. Families who needed more opportunities. Young Omegas who believed their voices did not matter because of old traditions. Every conversation showed Adrian why Charlotte was different. She did not see problems as numbers or reports. She saw people. However, change was never easy. Some members of the noble family still struggled to accept the new direction of the kingdom. They had spent their lives believing that status determined value. Seeing Charlotte receive respect challenged everything they had been taught. During a royal meeting, one elder questioned whether the kingdom was moving too quickly. He suggested that traditions existed for a reason, and that someone like Charlotte could create unnecessary changes. The room became quiet as everyone waited for Adrian's response. But before the Lycan King could speak, Charlotte stepped forward. Her voice was calm and respectful. Traditions can protect what is important, but they should never prevent us from becoming better. Her words surprised everyone. She was not rejecting the past. She was asking the kingdom to learn from it. Adrian watched with pride as Charlotte expressed herself with confidence. She no longer needed him to speak for her. She had found her own voice. After the meeting, Adrian and Charlotte walked through the castle gardens. The same place where they had shared their first honest conversations now felt completely different. "You have changed," Adrian said. Charlotte smiled softly. "Maybe. But I think I am finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." Adrian looked at her with admiration. He knew the kingdom saw her transformation, but he saw something deeper. He saw the same kindness that had existed from the beginning. The difference was that now Charlotte finally believed in herself. As the night continued, Adrian realized that the greatest gift Charlotte had given the kingdom was not a new idea or a new tradition. It was a reminder that every person deserved to be seen. The Omega who once stood alone during the ceremony had become a symbol of hope, and soon the entire Lycan realm would understand why the Lycan King had chosen to protect her from the very beginning. The story of Charlotte Bennet and Adrian Blackwood became a symbol of change throughout the Lycan realm. What began as a moment of unexpected kindness during a ceremony had transformed into a reminder that true worth could never be measured by status, family name, or the opinions of others. Charlotte had once entered Silver Moon Castle believing she was someone the world would never notice. She had spent years accepting that her voice was quieter than others, that her dreams needed to remain smaller, and that her place was always somewhere behind those with greater influence. But everything changed when the Lycan King saw what everyone else ignored. He saw her heart. He saw her courage. He saw the strength hidden beneath her gentle nature. Months after the ceremony, Charlotte continued working beside Adrian to create a kingdom where every person had the chance to be heard. She never forgot the people who had been overlooked because she understood what it felt like to be invisible. Her experiences became the reason she worked so hard to make sure others would not feel alone. Adrian watched the kingdom slowly change because of her influence. The nobles who once questioned her began to respect her wisdom. The villages that rarely received attention began to feel connected to the royal family. The people no longer saw Charlotte as simply the Omega who received the Lycan King's cloak. They saw her as a woman who reminded them of the values the kingdom had forgotten. One evening, Adrian and Charlotte returned to the place where everything began. The gardens of Silver Moon Castle were quiet beneath the moonlight. Adrian looked at her and remembered the night when she stood alone while everyone else judged her. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if that ceremony had never happened?" he asked. Charlotte smiled softly. "Sometimes. But I think every difficult moment brought me here. I learned that being overlooked does not mean being without value." Adrian looked at her with admiration. And I learned that being powerful does not mean having all the answers. Their words reflected how much they had both changed. Charlotte had discovered that she was never truly forgotten. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to be seen. Adrian had discovered that a great ruler was not someone who stood above others, but someone who listened and understood them. The royal cloak that once represented only the authority of the Lycan King became something more meaningful. It became a reminder of the night when a forgotten Omega was finally recognized. It represented compassion, respect, and the beginning of a new era. Across the kingdom, people shared the story of the girl who remained kind even when others were unkind to her. They remembered the king who stepped forward not because of appearance or tradition, but because he recognized genuine strength. Charlotte Bennet and Adrian Blackwood proved that destiny did not always arrive through grand promises or powerful beginnings. Sometimes destiny appeared in a single moment when one person chose to see the value in another. And from that day forward, the Lycan realm remembered one simple truth. The strongest hearts are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they belong to those who quietly choose kindness, even when the world has forgotten their name.